Today we're going to be talking about the enemy. Who's the enemy? Not me. I'm your friend. Right? But, well, there are plenty of enemies we could point our finger at, but we'll start with the really the most dangerous enemy that's been around the longest. So if we go way back in this story of ours, the story of life, so the first enemy was the Yetzer Harah, the evil inclination, the Nachash, the snake that came, the serpent, really fancy word, the serpent that approached Chava, and we know what the result of that was. We're stuck here 6,000 some odd years later trying to fix the situation. So he's the enemy, the Yetzer Harah. So this discussion will be based on two psukim, two verses from Mishlei, where the Shlomo HaMelech addresses the Yetzer Harah. Very interesting what he brings. We're going to get into it, and we're going to follow how these verses play themselves out in Chazal, how the rabbis approach these verses in the Gemara, and how it's expressed in Musar, Chassidut, Kabbalah. We're going to really see, a full range of how these verses are explained to get a real good understanding of how we can deal with this enemy. Okay, so we're going to start by reading the psukim from Mishlei. It's Mishlei chapter 25, verses 21 and 22. Okay, so it says there, Im ra'ev sona'acha, if your enemy is hungry, a soneh is an enemy, so sona'acha, your enemy, if your enemy is hungry, ha'achileu lachem, feed him bread. Ve'im tzameh, and if he's thirsty, hashkehu mayim, give him water to drink. That's the first pasuk. The next pasuk reads, as a continuation, Ki gehale matahoteh al rosho, because by giving him bread and water, it's as if you are putting hot burning coals on his head. Very interesting idea. We're going to hopefully appreciate what that means. V'Hashem yishalem lecha, and God will pay you for it. That's the most literal reading of these verses. So let's start with getting an idea of what it means in a simple sense. We always start with a simple understanding of the verses, because a very famous idea that no statement in the Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible, is meant to completely go out of its literal meaning. It says, Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. A verse is always meant to be taken the way it's said. Now, with that said, there are sometimes when we will explain, especially in Mishlei here, that the verses are sometimes parables, analogies, and then the real pshat, the real message of the verse, is really going on some other idea. And as a matter of fact, here is where this idea comes up. However, they do explain it in a literal sense, but the real message, so to speak, here in Mishlei, which is a book of parables, is going to be the secondary idea that we're going to talk about. But let's first talk about the most simplest way of understanding it. So let's start with a regular enemy. A person has an enemy. Countries have enemies. This probably can play itself out in many different ways. So you have an enemy. So he has an enemy because the enemy wronged him. That would be you'd be justified in having an enemy because he wronged you. So what the advice we're getting here is, if you have an enemy, so instead of taking revenge and trying to wrong him back or hating him for it, instead, when he falls and he's in a situation of need, he's starving and he's thirsty, he has no food, no water, obviously this can understand he's basically poverty stricken and he's stuck in a jam. So if you help him, feed him, give him to drink, give him support, meaning return his cruelty with kindness, so that becomes what the second verse says. It's as if you are putting coals, hot burning coals on his head. And God will pay you as well. So what does it mean, the hot burning coals on his head? This is the very, it's almost like the cryptid statement in this. So this has more than one explanation from the rabbis. The first, maybe we'll say what my opinion is the most basic explanation would be that by putting coals on his head, the head is the place of a person's ideas, a person's thoughts. A person all the time will justify his actions. And by burning putting coals on his head, what it could mean is you're causing his ideas about you and how he was, because everyone will justify their actions. So remember, in his world, he's a good guy, and he was justified in doing what he did to you. But by treating him good, you're softening him, so to speak, and he might then be able to readdress the situation and say, you know what, he wasn't such a bad guy after all. Maybe I was wrong. So you're kind of like breaking him down and causing him to rebuild his whole idea of what transpired and of you, and you could bring peace. Based on this, and you can also learn Rashi at the end, he says that Yeshalem lecha, God will pay you, doesn't mean God will pay you, but God will make peace between you. And so the idea, by being good, which is emulating Hashem's ways, so peace can come out. You can make peace. Fight. When you fight back, you could just bring more fight out of the person. But basically the expression in English they say is kill him with kindness. So that's one of the ways of understanding this idea. You're killing him with kindness. By being kind, you're killing the evil part of him, or the part of him that was hating you and acting terrible towards you. And now you're going to develop, if not a friendly attitude from him, at least passive. He won't anymore be out to get you. And ultimately that's best for you, because who needs to waste their time bothered with people that are out to get him, he's out to get them, I'm stronger, you're stronger. So even if you are stronger, but we have better things to be doing with our time than being the strong guy and beating somebody up, because if we can avoid the fight, we're much better off. So that's the wise advice from Shlomo HaMelech, to get out of such a problem, even though on the surface you might not think that, why should I be nice to him if he's been so cruel to me? But you'll gain in the end for it. This is a kindness that's self-motivated, because it's what's best for you ultimately. And this really is related to a pasuk that Shlomo HaMelech himself writes about. It says, Kemayim hapanim lapanim kein lev ha'adam la'adam. The same way that the water reflects the same face that you show it. If a person looks into a lake or river, and so that the face that he's looking at the water with will be reflected back at him. So we're being taught in a deep sense that so too the heart of man will reflect that which it's shown by another man in his heart. So when you come to a person with goodness and love and concern and care, so that's what you'll get. You'll almost awaken that, so to speak, from within the person. Now you might say, wow, that sounds beautiful and sounds amazing, and it sounds like it belongs in Hollywood, because this guy that's been bothering me, and I heard he wants to kill me. Yeah, right. I'm going to go up to him and say, but I love you, man. And he's going to take my head off and say, I love you too, now that you're dead. So how do we do? So the truth is, there's an actual extreme story brought that really shows that this can be true, even in the most extreme cases. I'm not advising to run after our biggest enemies, especially if he's armed. Wait till he puts the gun down, then maybe try. But if he's holding the gun, or in this story we'll see it's a knife, so I'm not advising it, but the story is like this. One of the great rabbis of the Jewish people, one of the Jewish leaders in a particular time and place, had to speak harshly about a shochet, about a person who slaughters animals. And we know that a person can only slaughter animals if he's God-fearing, and we can only trust him if he's God-fearing. So this put the person's job in jeopardy. He was so enraged, so angry, that he went after this rabbi, and he cornered him when he was alone in a room with a knife, and he wanted to kill him. He was so angry. So the person thought to himself, I remember hearing from one of the great rabbis before that even in any situation when someone, you can always, if you show someone love and it's genuine, that's what you can bring that out in the person. So he focused on fulfilling the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, realizing, not to judge a person unless you're coming from his perspective, trying to put himself in his shoes and how he must even rightfully want to kill me because of what I did from his perspective. And he did the deep soul searching, and he was able to feel for the other guy and love the other guy. And it went through. And that person, instead of coming forward and attacking him and killing him, drops the knife and begins to cry and begs him for forgiveness, because he realized on the spot his mistake, and it worked. So we don't know how far this idea can go. You never know. Now, that's one idea, that by being kind to him, you're going to break him down and bring out the goodness that maybe is lying dormant within. Another explanation brought for what it means that we're going to put coals on his head is explained to mean that we're going to cause him great embarrassment. Now, of course, here too, we have to understand what kind of person we're talking about in this explanation. We're talking about a person who's done bad things, but we're not talking about a terrorist that's whole life and every breath he breathes is to just wipe out, kill people. We're not talking about such a person. We're talking about a decent, normal person who became angry, who believes he's right, and who decided that he has the right to abuse a particular person and to attack that particular person. So in this such a case, when you respond to him with kindness and feed him and help him in his time of need, he becomes embarrassed because it makes him realize maybe how wrong he was, and he puts his head down in embarrassment. That's the idea of you putting coals on his head. It's like he can't look you in the eye after the way he treated you, and now you're treating him nice. It's going to force him to realize that he made a mistake. So essentially we get to the similar result, but that's the other pshat, is that by putting coals on his head is a mashal, is an analogy, in that you're going to cause him great embarrassment, which is going to, again, bring him to a deeper inner analysis, which is going to help him realize he's wrong. And now, what the other way to understand the conclusion of this idea is that God will pay you, is more simply that since you don't have any obligation to show him kindness because he doesn't deserve it, you're right in ignoring him and not trying to help him in his time of need because after what he did to you. So you have a good reason not to help him. If you help him anyway, so God will repay you in a very big way for that kindness that you show, because it's kindness on the highest level. It's kindness that's undeserving even. So if you do all that for the sake of trying to make peace, that's already, you deserve a lot of reward in the end. And that's why it says specifically that God will reward you because you're going to get a great reward for such a type of behavior. Okay, that's the simple way to understand this verse. But now let's go back to what we started by saying. We said, who's the enemy? Who's our enemy?
Yetzer Harah.
The Yetzer Harah. So if we're from Kentucky, we tell you we got an enemy, the Yetzer Harah. We got to get our shotgun and go get him, go after him, right? No, maybe. So unfortunately, I wish it would be so easy to get rid of the Yetzer Harah with a shotgun. What we're going to have to use is a different type of shotgun. We're going to have to really understand how we can get an upper hand on this Yetzer Harah who's been around, and he's got so many disguises, and he's, we really need help with the Yetzer Harah. So let's approach these verses now from the perspective of the enemy being not the simple, regular physical enemy, but the Yetzer Harah, the spiritual enemy of the Jewish people. So for this, we have a Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara in Sukkah starts like this: Darash Rabbi Avira, ve'itema Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So Rabbi Avira, or some say Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, explain this idea. Shiv'a shemot yesh leYetzer Harah. The evil inclination, the Yetzer Harah, has 7 names, and we're not going to get into all of them. Shlomo HaMelech kara'o soneh. Now the name that King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, gave the Yetzer Harah is soneh. Shenemar, like we read from the pasuk Mishlei, Im ra'ev sonacha, if your enemy is hungry, feed him bread. If he's thirsty, give him water to drink. Because with this, you are putting, again, hot fiery coals on his head, and God will pay you for that. So, but now, once we change this enemy to the Yetzer Harah, so we have to shift a little bit. We'll start with Rashi. Rashi explains, what does it mean? If your evil inclination is hungry, what does it mean when your evil inclination is hungry? What does it mean that for the beast within, so to speak, is hungry? It means it wants, like any animal wants, to fill himself up with what it desires. So if your Yetzer Harah is strong and burning inside and trying to convince you and pull you in his direction towards the pursuit of the pleasures, baseless pleasure, even God forbid, that could be forbidden, not only permissible things. So what's your solution? What's the idea how to combat that force within? He says, if your Yetzer Harah is trying to bring you to Avera, to sin, feed him bread. Very nice, feed him bread. So here bread doesn't mean physical bread. Bread means Torah. How do we know that bread can mean Torah? So there's a verse that says, Lechu lachamu belachami, go and fight with my bread. Now, what is God's bread in this context? It's my Torah. Fight with the Torah, the bread of Torah, so to speak. And interestingly, the word for lechem, bread, is the same word for lochem, war. So here he says, make your Yetzer Harah busy. Burden him with the war, the fight of Torah. That's what he says. What does it mean, hashkeu mayim? So, also, mayim is a remez to water, as it says, call all that are thirsty, go to the water to drink. Now, there's another verse that says in the future, people are not going to be thirsty for water. There'll be water in abundance, like today. They'll be thirsty for the water of Torah. Torah is called mayim. Why is Torah compared to water? Because just as water falls to a low place, Torah also comes from a very high place, the highest of places, and it descends down to this world. And even the lowest of people, Torah is everybody's. Nobody is excluded from the ability to learn God's Torah. Now, by making him busy and burdening him with this battle, the battle of Torah, so the result is that's also like putting coals on his head, because what you're going to do is you're going to transform your evil inclination once you get him involved in the right way with Torah, and you can reach a level where there becomes peace between you. That God will come, so to speak, and help you overpower the evil inclination, in that he becomes almost a willful participant now in your learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. And he will no longer try to have you destroyed from the world. And this, actually, the rabbis explain, is the level of, like we see in the Kriyat Shema that we read every day. It says that you should love God with all your heart. Now, in English, there is no hidden message in loving God with all your heart. It means to love God totally. But in the Hebrew, it says b'chol levavecha, with two bets. Not one bet, but two bets. And that means to imply that we have in our heart two parts. There's a part of our heart that we say, where it's seated the good inclination, the Yetzer Tov. And there's a part in our heart which we're told that is the seat of the evil inclination. So when we love God with both our hearts, so it means that the evil inclination and the good inclination are both ready to serve Hashem out of love. And that means a transformation of the person and of the evil inclination to where the person is totally ready now to serve Hashem. Now, we must understand that this level that we're speaking about here is not a simple level to attain. The Ben Ish Chai, in his explanations on the Parsha, actually this week, Vayikra, he explains that the level of having a perfect heart, which is what David HaMelech says in Tehillim, that my heart is a void within me, they explain that it's because he almost killed his Yetzer Harah through hard work all his life. He became a full Baal Tshuva, a full tzaddik, and his heart was totally pure for Hashem. But this is really the highest level of tzaddikim reach this level. It's the level of a person when he's reached a point where his thought, speech, and action are always perfectly focused on what's permissible and what's correct. That means, imagine, for a person's thoughts to be perfect all the time, that his speech is 100% perfect and his actions are 100% perfect, doing only the will of God. And now we might find that this sounds impossible, outrageous, but the truth is that this is the foundation of Judaism, really is built on this idea, because the Avot, the Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, each of them, we're told, reached a level of becoming a chariot to the divine presence. And this, the Ramban, in his commentaries on the Chumash, explains, wasn't just an occasional thing. It was a constant thing. That's why the Or HaChaim explains, when he's on the Parsha of Vayera Elav Hashem, that God appeared to Avraham. So it only says that in the beginning of the Parsha, and it doesn't mention anymore God appearing to Avraham. So he explains why not. Because God never stopped appearing to Avraham, because at that level, when Avraham reached the age of 99 and circumcised himself and became perfect, it says, walk before me and become perfect. So once Avraham became a perfect conduit, a perfect vessel to do the will of Hashem, so that God never left him. He didn't have to reappear to him, according to the Or HaChaim. And that's why the rabbis tell us that the Avot, Hen HaMerkava, the forefathers, were a chariot to the divine presence. You know, what's a chariot? You know, you have if you look in the olden days, a man would stand on a chariot, on a thing with wheels, and the horses would pull him wherever he wanted to go. That's what they became. They became an opportunity for the divine presence to be active in the world through the sages, the avot, through the forefathers. And every tzaddik that reaches this level is really a walking Beis HaMikdash. It says that the Heichal of God, the inner chamber of God, the Heichal where we, like you go into a synagogue or in the Beit HaMikdash, there was a Heichal. What is the true Heichal of God? So we think the highest level of the divine revelation was in the Beis HaMikdash. But in essence, the true Heichal of God is in the heart of man. When man purifies his heart, that becomes the where God resides in the truest sense, and that is with the tzaddikim. Again, it's explained that the brain and heart are two parts of the body that never go to sleep. All other body parts go to sleep. Now, when we look at a human being, the way they're made up with arms, legs, a body, a head, a brain, a heart, so we say that the Jewish people are like one body as well. So the souls of Israel correspond sometimes to the feet, to the arms, to the shoulders. As a matter of fact, great rabbis even have, we're taught that in Kabbalah that, for example, the Rambam and the Ramban, two similar names, Maimonides and Nachmanides, each one corresponded to the left, one to the left and one to the right shoulder of Adam HaRishon. The left is where judgment comes from, din, and therefore the Rambam was a posek. He was someone who was famous for writing Jewish law, whereas the Ramban, Nachmanides, was rooted in the right side. Therefore, he wrote a lot of Jewish ideology. He also wrote unbelievable commentaries on the Gemara, but mainly he's known for being a Kabbalist and writing his commentary on the Chumash, and he wrote books, deep books in Jewish thought, because the right side is the side of wisdom. The left side is the side of judgment. So we see the Rambam became a halachic expert, and the Ramban, although also, but most famous for his thoughts on Jewish ideology. In any event, what we're saying is that the heart and the brain never go to sleep, and the heart and brain correspond to the righteous, to the tzaddikim, because they don't go to sleep. They are constantly a chariot and a abode for Hashem to dwell. That's really the pasuk. V'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in them. The Al-Shich HaKadosh says, what does it mean that make me a sanctuary and I will dwell in them? It should say, make me a sanctuary and I will dwell in it. Right? One sanctuary. So he explains that the challenge, the command is for each and every person to make himself into a sanctuary. And then God will dwell in them, i.e. he will dwell in the Jewish people. So that's this very high level of a tzaddik where we've transformed our heart, and that's what the verse here is getting at. So what I'd like to do now is go in a little bit of a different direction. We're going to take the same ideas, the same enemy, same psukim, and explain it now from a perspective of Musar. And one of the foundations from Yisrael Salanter is we need to hear Musar, we need to hear moral reproof, we need to be given the right direction in life through Musar. Like even King Solomon himself says, Shema b'ni musar avicha. Listen, my son, to the Musar, to the moral reproof of your father. And that's meant to get us in line. Okay? So let's look at the next commentary. This is more from a perspective of Musar. It says like this. So based on Rashi says if your enemy is hungry, right? We said the enemy is your Yetzer Harah. So what should you do? Feed him bread. If he's thirsty, feed him water. Now, today, where is the Yetzer Harah found? Because if we could find him, we could get that shotgun and go take care of him. Problem is, he's in you. We said it's in the other part of your heart. He's in one part of your heart. He is within you. From the sin of the Eitz Hadas, from when man sinned, one of the things that changed drastically in the world was that instead of evil being external to man, it became a part of him. And that's why it's so much more difficult to eradicate. So this Yetzer Harah is in us. So if my enemy is hungry and thirsty, where must I attack? I must attack myself, so to speak. This is connected to different statements from the rabbis. We're not going to get into depth, but just to show you that I'm not making anything up over here. The rabbis say that the Torah can only be truly fulfilled and accomplished and acquired, attained, if a person kills himself over it. So what does it mean, kill myself? It doesn't mean kill. It means I have to, put down and weaken and kill the evil part of me, the Yetzer Harah. So here too, when you see that your Yetzer Harah, the evil in you, the beast within, is out of control. It wants to just go crazy with passion and desire and go after things that are forbidden or even things that are permissible, like it wants to overindulge in pleasures of food and partying and just to take the yoke, take the responsibility of serving Hashem completely off his shoulders and make life a party. That's what is that out of control. So what is the advice we're being told over here? Feed him bread and water. So it's interesting. We can understand it like this. It says in Pirkei Avot, how does one acquire Torah? How does one become a vessel that's fit for the Torah to reside in him, for the divine presence to reside in him? So it says, eat a little bit of bread with salt and water, a little bit of water with measure. That's Pirkei Avot. So here too, we apply that idea here. What we could be hinting to is feeding him bread and water is feeding him only bread and not so much of it, and only water and not so much of it, which is a general idea of how to really get the beast in his cage, so to speak, or at least put a leash on him, is to limit your indulgence in the pleasures, the baseless pleasures. It's not to go after extras. Extras just lead to more and more extras. And you get lost in the pursuit of things you don't really even need. A person starts with needing a car. Then, he wants a nice car. And then he wants a nice car like his neighbor. And then he wants more, and he needs a new car because every year they come up with a new car. And he's buying cars he can't afford to have it fit going. You're buying a car that goes 300 miles an hour. You can't even go more than 60 miles an hour. So you went with needing a car, and there's many cars out there, great cars from whatever price is really your range. But instead, since you don't have to pay for it all up front, now they give you a very nice deal. They tell you pay it later. How much? It doesn't matter how much. You're going to pay me later anyway. But it's all a trick. So you buy a car you can't afford. You buy clothing you can't afford. You buy everything you can't afford to have more and more and more. And you know what? When you have more, you always want more. So stopping to go after the extras is the first and most powerful tool we have against this inclination, this part of us that is going to be lured after all of these extras. So that's the advice over here. You want to really get a handle on the Yetzer Harah? Limit. Put a handle on things. Put things in their place. Only what you need. A little bit of bread, a little bit of water. Obviously, we're not going to take it so literally. There is someone who's on a high level can, but we mean, the general message is, don't get stuck on the extras. Don't get stuck on the secondary things of life, because they're going to distract you and you'll end up wasting your whole life on them. Stick with the essential things that you've come here for. A father, for example, a father can be a great father. If you ask him, what kind of father were you after he's going to be old, 60 and ready to retire? He says, I was a great father. I broke my back for my children. I did everything for them. I worked like a dog to make sure that they had the newest sneakers and the newest games and the newest clothes and the nicest toys and everything. And they're like, well, then you're going to, do a hard cut. This is one of those cool movies. You do a hard cut and go, son, what kind of father did you have? Well, to tell you the truth, he wasn't really around very much. To tell you the truth, I really didn't get to know him that well. What kind of father did you have? He didn't have a father. He had someone who provided with physical needs, but that's not what a father's all about. A father's about more than that. So again, you can get caught up on the things that are not important and miss the main things. So this is, the general message in life, but it starts with the simple basic, we're talking about feeding an animal. So limit, and that's the start in how to get a handle on this Yetzer Harah in you. Once you're focused and you're not wasting your time on all of this, feeding feeding yourself to no end. So then you can focus on learning Torah, doing God's mitzvot, and that will put you in the right direction. So that is the explanation according to Musar. That's the explanation we have. Okay, so now we want to appreciate a little bit of another aspect of this war of Torah. When we started off saying in the beginning from Rashi that the war of Torah is to burden the evil inclination with the learning of Torah. So what does that mean exactly? So the funny thing is, you would think that when I go to the base medrash to learn, so that my Yetzer Harah waits outside. It's like, when you go to a party, you park the car outside, you go into the party, the car stays outside. In the olden days it would be a horse. You would bring the horse into a party with you. But the Yetzer Harah is not so easygoing. He makes sure he's not only in the party with you, he's the first one in the party with you. When you sit down to a good shiur that the rabbi gives, and you think that you're the only one there, the Yetzer Harah is sitting right next to you, taking notes, and he's ready to use all that information against you. So we must be careful. The Yetzer Harah can come to you like a rabbi saying, well, it's really only unkosher because of this, but since it's over here, it can sing you a song and a dance and get you to do almost anything. We have to be very on guard against the Yetzer Harah. So how do we weaken him? How do we strengthen the side of good and weaken the Yetzer Harah? So according to the Arizal, he explains like this, that when, again, back to the first sin of man, we said that the Yetzer Harah became a part of us. But also the Torah itself, there was a level of darkness that came over the world, and it even affected the Torah. That's why if you open up a Gemara, the Gemara is called Talmud Bavli. Bavli, the word Bavel, means confusion. It's the same name of the place given when God confused the language of people. And there's a level of darkness in the Torah. This is based on a verse that says that when I sit in darkness, God is there with me. What darkness are we talking about? We're talking here about the darkness of the Torah. Though I sit in darkness, because when I sit to learn Torah, everything's dark and confused from the result of sin, but God is there with me to shine a light, to bring clarity into the Torah itself. Now, this is a very deep concept. When one opens up a Gemara and he finds out this rabbi's arguing and that rabbi's arguing and this is not clear and that's not clear, he gets confused. What is this? But that's only the beginning. The idea is to work through the unclarity, work through the confusion, work through the darkness to come to a greater appreciation and understanding of truth. The hard work that goes into learning the Gemara and being mevarer, sifting through and bringing to light the absolute truth and the halacha, taking the different opinions and working out a final halacha, that's called bringing darkness to light. And when we accomplish that, we redeem ourselves and we redeem the Torah. And interestingly enough, the word for psak, which is a clear-cut ruling in halacha, and the word for safek, which means doubt, are exactly the same letters. Our job in learning is to come from a state, from a position of doubt and confusion, and reach the level of psak, to come to that level of clarity. And that's the tikkun, that's the rectification that we must do to work on ourselves and at the same time the Torah as well. When we work hard in bringing clarity to Torah, the Arizal explains all that energy and power that it takes from us in our body. At the same time that we bring clarity to Torah, we refine and bring clarity to our own inner being. And we become more refined and more holy. And we weaken and divorce this evil power within. And we attain a much higher level of purity and holiness. So the result of working hard through the confusion of Torah brings us to a much more pure and higher level itself. And that's the war of Torah. That's the lechem, the war of Torah. And that's what it means by you're going to get rid of the Yetzer Harah, because when you work hard like that, that's how you get rid of him. You weaken him. You become more holy. And as a matter of fact, the Arizal himself, they speak about him. The Rav Chaim Vital writes about him that he would work very hard when learning the Gemara, so much so that he would sweat. And they asked him once, you're working so hard, you're sweating. He said, through the hard physical exertion and sweating, that's how you weaken the Yetzer Harah. He would learn, look at this, for each of the weekdays, because again, the weekdays correspond also to the idea of the mixing of good and bad. For each weekday, he would learn a particular direction of halacha. He would learn 6 different ways to learn the halacha during the weeks and work very hard. And I think it says there 1 for Shabbat. So again, that's just a little bit of information to appreciate what it means to bring the Yetzer Harah and burden him with Torah. So we said the first pshat, this is Rashi's pshat, burden him with Torah, a deeper appreciation and understanding of burdening the Yetzer Harah with Torah means to work hard in your Torah learning to, weaken him and get rid of him. The first thing we said is also a pshat in the burden of Torah, But this is a different burden. This means you work hard on suppressing the Yetzer Harah's ta'avot, his desires. You weaken him by fighting him specifically in the actual avoda of Torah, the work of Torah, in that you make sure you deprive and deny him the pleasure seeking. And that's hard work. That means working on oneself and one's self-control and discipline. And that's also a war. But that's a battle, a war that you fight, an inner battle on yourself, mamish. So the first war that we're mentioning from Rashi is a war in the Torah. The second fight is also a fight of Torah. But it's the word Torah, which means instruction, and the end instruction of Torah is to act out the Torah and to turn yourself into a temple, into a place where God can reside. So the second fight of Torah that we're talking about is turned on you. It's working on yourself, on your attributes, on your flaws and your weaknesses, and building yourself up so strong that you become able to overpower your Yetzer Harah. And that starting point is limit the extras. So we have now two different ways of fighting the Yetzer Harah within. One last idea I'd like to throw out, again with the idea of the war of Torah with the Yetzer Harah, is a little bit of a different idea. We started talking about a fight and a war, and it sounds very harsh. The continuation of the pasuk says to also give him water. So we have to appreciate, why is it mentioned to give him bread and water? We could have just mentioned bread. Just mention bread, the war. Water, in the term water, when we compare Torah to water, we're not talking anymore about fighting. We're not talking about a war. We're talking about something else. We're talking about something beautiful, something that's pleasurable. Just like there's physical pleasure, there's deeper, higher pleasures. And what we want to understand is like this. Water is the source of all pleasure. That's according to Kabbalah. Water is linked with pleasure. Each of the different four elements that the human body is made up of, earth, wind, fire, and water, has a different, different nature to it. For example, earth is where laziness comes from. Fire is where, anger and haughtiness comes from. Wind is where frivolous type of acting like a jokester comes from. And water is where pleasure comes from. So when we're mentioning that Torah is water, we also are trying to also point to the idea of Torah being fun, being beautiful, being a pleasure to learn. And the truth is, when one gets into his Torah learning, there can be nothing more pleasurable than to really have a question and go deep in finding an answer, or hearing a beautiful, creative presentation of Torah ideas that mixes the pshat, the sod, it becomes so pleasurable, so enjoyable, so intellectually stimulating that it becomes your pleasure. So another weapon, so to speak, against the Yetzer Harah is, meaning a person in the end is going to stay where he's most happy, where he feels he gets more pleasure. So if we make our learning fun and pleasurable, that's another way, because, a child wants to be where the party's at. So if you can convince yourself and you can actually make and find the beauty in Torah learning, so then we don't need to go to these other places for fun. We have our fun being a Torah Jew, following the halachot. The funny thing is, from the outside it looks like we live a dark, we wear black, but some people even think we live a life that's like a black life. No fun, no nothing, just you can't do this, you can't do that. But if you really find the right people that are inside and you ask them, they say, I was never more happy than when I started following the Torah and the mitzvot, and I have no greater joy than when I'm learning Torah. And that's the greatest weapon of all, because then the fight just disappears. You're so busy with good, you have no time to even deal with the bad. We should all merit and be zeicha to really find the beauty in Torah, the beauty in life. And this enemy of ours, if we can't convince him to join us, then hopefully we can at least find a way to, like we said, weaken him and get rid of him to whatever degree we have to. And with that, we conclude.